We are live.
We are live.
Hello.
I was having the YouTube live in the background, right? So I was keeping listening to the music of the countdown, and I love it. So anyway, let's start from scratch. No, hello everyone. Second episode in the history of the podcast in English. Also, we have a great guest today. That is Gino Raidy. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And so, couple of things. First, the reasons behind this live on Lebanon. As you know, we are born as a podcast to discuss Italian politics, which is something we had a lot of fun doing in the last 1 year with great results. We got more than 10 among former and current prime ministers and ministers, and in our own, I mean, we thought maybe we had some impact on the current state of Italian politics, like very, very small impact. And given that we like complex and controversial political topics, we thought, what is more complex and controversial than Lebanon? And personally, I mean, it's a country that is also very close to my heart. I've been there. I did volunteering in Bekaa Valley in 2018. Okay. So I spent 1 month there. I went multiple times. Today is joining us Niar, is one of my friends in Dubai, like one of several Lebanese friends that I meet and I always talk with about Lebanese politics. And what we wanted to do was to first give an introduction about the country in general and what is the political situation there, and also have like some more in-depth questions later on, also for our Lebanese friends that follow Gino and are more interested in the depth of the topic. I will let Niar and Giulio introduce themselves, and then also I will spend a few words on Gino.
Sure.
Should I start?
Yeah, please.
Well, there's nothing much to say. As I said, as Gianluca said, I'm Niar. I met Gianluca in Dubai through some friends. And he always showed interest every time I see him. So let's talk about what happened last time on the news, and we would talk about it. We would debate a few points, and it's always a nice thing to do and to always listen to someone also from abroad about how they see things or how they perceive it, and they ask questions that we don't necessarily ask ourselves also those questions, because we are a lot in our bubble. Me as a Lebanese, I'm directly involved because it's my own country, right? So, and then Gianluca came to me once saying, like, I want to do a podcast about Lebanon. And so, of course, like, I gave out your name, Gino, and I told him, let's see if he will reach you. And yes, today we're here, and Gianluca said, like, hey, I'd like you to join the call, but for sure, like, we want to hear Gino talk, and it's always insightful to have new perspectives. So yeah, that's it.
Thanks, guys. There's even less to say about me. I'm Giulio, one of the co-founders and co-hosts of this podcast, and I'm probably the most ignorant person in the room today, mostly because I haven't got a lot of notions about Lebanon. I read about it and I studied the history, especially the recent history. I remember when I was a kid, people were talking about the war in Lebanon and so on. The fact that the country managed to go back to its knees. But having some insight from someone who actually is from there, it would be super, super fascinating. So I will be mostly a listener today. So you guys go.
Awesome. Pleasure to meet you all. I really thank you for hosting me today. I guess if you want to introduce Lebanon, you could go way back, like with Italy. But I think it's better to just discuss it since the 20s, when the current Greater Lebanon was actually formed in its current state. I think that would be a good place to start to understand the problems we're facing today. So Lebanon before that was part of the Ottoman Empire for 400 years almost. And Mount Lebanon, which is the mountains of Lebanon, was the Lebanon we know historically. The Bekaa, where you were, Gianluca, and parts of Hermel and Akkar and even Beirut were added to Lebanon officially in the 1920s, when we were still under the French mandate in Lebanon. So the idea back then is that Mount Lebanon was mainly Maronites and Druze, so two different sects that were in the mountains mainly, and the others were centered in the cities on the coast and in the inner part of the country. So the idea back then was to give more farmland to the mountain, which is Lebanon, which is why you see places like the Bekaa and Akkar joining part of it. The thing is, the system was built by the French mandate to ensure that there's a country in the region where the Christians of the Middle East, like we always hear, have a say. They're not just a minority where they're not in control. And you can see that in the fact that even though they're not a majority anymore, and they haven't been since probably the Civil War, the president is still always a Maronite, and half the parliament is Christian, and half the ministerial positions are also like that. So the idea is that before the Civil War, it was clear that there was some sects in charge and the rest were all marginalized. This is one of the many reasons that caused the Civil War, the very complicated Civil War that everyone was involved with. So to get out of that, what happened is basically they decided that if no one agrees on everything, nothing moves forward. So even if one sectarian political party decides that this is not good for them, they can very easily stop all the official public institutions from working, whether it's parliament, whether it's the presidency or the cabinet of ministers. And for a while it was okay. The war ended in 1990, for those who don't know, which is the same year I was born. So I don't have any memory of the actual war, but we lived the consequences of that 15-year civil war. Why did people finally rise up in October of 2019, 17 October of 2019? A lot of the news worldwide was about a WhatsApp tax, and people thought, this is the reason it was. But it's actually a lot more than that. It's just a nice headline to write or nice reports to do about a country that not a lot of people know about. But the thing is, a lot of times the political sectarian leaders of Lebanon drive the country almost to a cliff when it comes to economic collapse and societal reform, etc. And what usually used to happen is someone from abroad would swoop in and throw money at it and keep it going for a while. So you had that after the war. A lot of money came in for rebuilding. And that's what they did. They basically just erased all the heritage pre-war and built new touristic stuff, business skyscrapers, etc., that are still empty till today. Then in 2000, the Israeli occupation finally was removed from southern Lebanon, and more investments, more money came into Lebanon because it was the post-occupation Lebanon, and we were hoping things would get better. 2005, same thing happened when the Syrian occupation, the Assad forces, also withdrew from Lebanon after popular pressure for that in March 14, 2005. Money came in. When the money was running out, 2008, the financial crisis happened worldwide. So you saw a lot of Lebanese people who are expats and the diaspora in Europe and the States, where they felt it the most, hide their money in Lebanon to avoid getting a haircut or whatever austerity measures were happening in whatever country they live in. So that injected some money in. The problem happened when the Syrian situation began to escalate, and Lebanon stopped being an important topic for regional and international powers. So no one was throwing money at that anymore, and the situation kept deteriorating when it comes to daily life, fuel shortages, lack of flour to make bread. All of this happened before October 17, 2019, and it helped get people to the street. And for me personally, I think the main reason why people went down in so many numbers with so much hope and rage back then was because most of the country was burning in wildfires in 2019, like literally almost 4,000 fires across the country. And the government and local authorities were doing absolutely nothing to try to stop them, nothing at all. And the cherry on top of all this tragedy that happened in 2019 was that Lebanon has helicopters that are made for fighting fires specifically. But because they wouldn't decide on who would take the contract to do the necessary maintenance for these helicopters, no one which was $150,000 only. No one did that, and no one even bothered to do that. And to make things worse, they decided they're gonna sell these helicopters to another country when the country was still burning. No one was taking care of the people whose homes were lost, etc. So that did two things. It showed, especially the Lebanese youth, that one, you can never count on the current system and the current politicians to do anything to help you. And two, they realized that they don't hate each other that much, because one way the sectarian war criminals that are still in power today hold power is by always scaring you from the other sect. So they say, you need to support me because I'm protecting you from X, Y, Z, etc. And they do it publicly. So one would insult the other and would make the others partisans hold on to them even more, just for the sectarian reasons. It reminded people that they don't really hate each other, that was just a form of control the sectarian politicians that are still in power today used constantly. What was unfortunate after that, and out of everyone's control, was the pandemic that happened a few months after the October 2019 uprising started. So that put a break on all the pressure that was being mounted in the streets and in political institutions. But what was much worse was the August 4 blast this past August in 2020. I'm pretty sure even people who aren't that familiar about news from Lebanon heard about this massive blast on the port, which was the largest non-nuclear explosion in history. And just this week, Haikido University in Japan, researchers found out that the blast was so huge that it affected the ionosphere that surrounds Earth. Yeah, imagine how huge that blast was. And more than 200 people were killed, and half the city of Beirut was leveled, basically. And again, the army, the police, the government, none of them was present there. It was young men and women, Lebanese young men and women, who just grabbed whatever they could, and they sifted through the rubble and helped the people wounded, while the army and the police just sat on chairs and looked at them. And sectarian political parties tried to capitalize on this. You saw people like Gibran Basir, which is the ex-foreign minister, go up and say after the blast, this is a great opportunity to get funding from abroad. So he saw this, maybe the worst tragedy in this country's history, as an opportunity for him, because no one on earth talks to this political class anymore, thankfully. And he was even sanctioned by the US Treasury Department a couple of months after that, along with a few other ministers. So instead of rushing to help or figuring out how to save people, they just decided, yeah, this will be a good chance for us to get money. Like I was explaining to you guys before, they usually drive the country to a cliff and someone swoops in. A Gulf country, Paris 1, Paris 2 conferences that were donor conferences. Some even happened in Italy. I think it was the support group for Lebanon. They had a few meetings there and pledged money to help, partly with the Syrian refugee crisis and partly for the country itself. So that's, in a nutshell, the things that I think people should understand, that the October 2019 one was a historic moment for Lebanon, where it was the first time a Lebanese identity that is devoid of sectarian loyalty actually materialized, and where a lot of people actually found their identity, which has always been a problem, I think, for Lebanon, given many people are used to putting their sect first, then their nationality. So depending on where you were born, what school you went to, that's what you felt allegiance to, not the country itself. So seeing that happen, October 2019 gave us a lot of hope, I think, and when there was none, honestly. But unfortunately, between the pandemic and the blast, the mood and the situation now and the motivation of people is very different than what it was in late 2019. Obviously, now it's more despair and hope and hopelessness, complete hopelessness, and extreme hatred and rage towards every single one still in power that couldn't do anything. And one way to understand how deep this mistrust and hatred towards the sectarian war criminals is, after the blast in Beirut, Emmanuel Macron, the French president, came down and actually walked in the streets with the people and felt safe enough to do that, given Beirut, French president, blah, blah, blah. Not a single minister or member of parliament or president or prime minister or speaker of parliament dared show their face in public since August 4. None of them would dare go down. None of them apologized. None of them paid their respects to the people that perished, that were killed by them. And the fact that the explosion was caused by 2,750 tons of ammonium nitrate stored in the port just meters away from where most of the city lives. And it's their fault, basically, for 7 years, imagine, and no one bothered to do anything. So this is the current situation and mood, I guess, in Lebanon, where a lot of people understand that there is absolutely no way anything will become better till this sectarian political parties stop occupying power here.
So first of all, thank you. I have a few friends texting me, asking, but I didn't know there was so much behind it, and I also think it was a quite complete overview. I think it's always a difficult topic to tackle from an objective perspective, right? Especially for people that live in the country, and as you correctly said, sectarianism is embedded in society, and it's really difficult. Even for people that are quite smart otherwise and maybe live abroad and they are open-minded, it's difficult to accept that even their, let's say, party that started
It's the wrong
was
one, exactly.
wrong, and is all the system that is wrecked.
It's difficult. It's difficult to come to the realization that what you believed in and you fought for so long was actually not working for you. A lot of people would rather, just sink with the ship instead of admit that what they did something wrong. And you see that a lot in a generational way in Lebanon. So you see our parents' generation, the ones that actually lived through the war. You see the guilt they live because they accepted, just moving on and letting the politicians do whatever they want, because they were scared of going back to the civil war. When now it's obvious that the socioeconomic situation is even worse than the peak of the Lebanese civil war, which was 15 years long. So you see that guilt starting to show and them starting to be more involved, because I think a lot of them feel that it's their fault we got here. They let it, the Ponzi scheme that happened in Lebanon just continue. And maybe I should say about the why everyone's money in Lebanon is gone. So what happened is in Lebanon, you can use US dollars and the Lebanese lira interchangeably. So you can pay them in a restaurant, in your bank, wherever. Both of them are accepted. So since the 90s, the lira has been pegged to equal $1 is 1,500 liras, 1,500 liras. And to prop this up, given there was no growth, no economic plan, no economic incentive, the central bank would take the US dollars from our accounts and would give them to the government to spend on projects, on their budget, etc. And they kept going overboard with it, to the point that Lebanon, which the GDP is maybe per year $40 to $50 billion, now we're in debt over 100 billion. And what's left of everyone's assets in the bank is maybe 16 billion. We're not even sure yet. The central bank governor doesn't say. So it was basically a huge Ponzi scheme where they would give you a very high interest rate for putting dollars in the central bank, and the central bank would give them to the government to spend or steal, basically, or waste. So now anyone's savings in the bank are completely gone. And the only people that were able to save their money since October 2019 was the sectarian leaders in charge and the people in their entourage. So now what minimum wage used to be around $450 in Lebanon per month. Now it's a bit less than $50 a month. So, and for a country that imports almost everything we need in either euros or dollars or other foreign currency, you can't afford anything anymore when your wage is still the same, if not less. That's if we even still have a job. So what's happening now in Lebanon, where the already shrinking middle class is now all of them under the poverty line. So they survive on less than $2 a day, all because of this sectarian political leadership that just doesn't want to leave.
I want to bring a bit of an economics perspective in. So I like the definition of Ponzi scheme is exactly what happened, right? So
exactly,
basically,
they just
like
promise you with something, take your money, give it to someone else, and then when people wanted, hey, where's my money, it all collapsed. And this is what we're facing through now.
Yeah, and it was twofold, right? So from one side, it was targeted to the Lebanese diaspora because, as Gino mentioned at the beginning, there was the civil war. A lot of Lebanese left. It's a country that has more people abroad actually than people in the country.
Yeah.
And all these people, I mean, were happy. Of course, I see the ones that are in the Gulf, right? That are probably the closest also, and they come back often and stuff. And, you know, since I was in Dubai, that is 2018, I was hearing people telling me, you know, how I invest my money, I put them in my bank account in Lebanon. And I was like, you know, what is the difference in the interest rate between Lebanese lira and US dollars? And it was quite different. Now, I don't remember the difference, but it was at least a few percentage points. And I asked, okay, but how does the currency work? No, the currency is pegged. 1,500 Lebanese liras is $1. Okay, and how long has been it this way? 10 years,
21
forever.
years,
I don't know.
21 years
Yeah.
now. Yeah.
21 years. Yeah, I was like, guys, I mean, I'm not an expert of
And with
interest
zero
rate.
growth, but that's what's interesting.
No, but the thing is that
how would they give you 12% interest rate when there's literally nothing happening? Who gets 12% interest rate? That's like it's so fishy originally. But when everyone is benefiting, no one asks the question. And the problem is it's the small the people who don't have a lot of wealth that paid the price. The ones that have enough wealth have the connections to take their money out. Some of it is in Switzerland. There's now a huge investigation there with the central bank governor, Riyad Salameh, by the Swiss authorities. The Panama Papers showed a lot of money hidden also by a lot of Lebanese politicians. So the worst part about this, it's, the school teacher, the cop, these people who lost their life savings. But the people who were running this Ponzi scheme all have hundreds of millions of dollars, if not billions, stored in their offshore accounts. So the only people that lost in this Ponzi scheme are normal people who weren't even buying into it. So it's not the expats with a lot of money that just want to take advantage of the high interest rate. It's everyone's money that got lost. And I'm sure some people made some money from that interest rate, but I don't think overall it helped. Obviously, everything collapsed because of this greed and short-sightedness.
Can I ask a quick question? Sorry, there is one passage that I missed. So essentially, citizens were putting their money in the central bank. Okay, that's the way I understood.
The banks were putting the citizens' money, the deposits, in the central bank because they would get a lot of interest for it. Of course, it's not. It's not the actual citizen. And in Lebanon, most of the banks are owned or chaired by politicians. So
now makes sense. Okay,
yeah, like the prime minister has a bank.
I was wondering whether it was forced on them or not. So it wasn't forced on them.
It was like on the individual depositor. Yes, it wasn't their choice to put the money in the central bank.
Wow. Okay.
But why would the bank invest in giving loans out to small businesses or startups when the central bank is telling them, come put your money here, so I can peg the lira to the dollar, and you'll get 12% or whatever, 11% a year. Which bank is going to say no? Especially since all the banks, at least the major ones, are, if not owned by the political parties, they're in their extended family. So the prime minister has a bank, the president has a bank, and his family close to him. Most of the people that were ministers either are chairmen of boards of the bank or board members. So you can't split the banking sector from the political establishment in Lebanon. It's one and the same.
Word of advice for whoever in Italy wants to make the central bank public again. Here's what you get, because it used to be kind of like that. I mean, anyway, Gianluca will probably know way better than me. Thank you. That's very clear. Thanks a lot, man.
Go ahead, sir.
No, I was listening to you, Gianluca.
One quick point of this thing, and we go back on track from this economical deviation. So, couple of things. First,
I think I mentioned that, Gianluca, sorry, about the economic one, because I'm seeing it recently that a lot of people, Lebanese young people, when they say they're struggling or that it's been a very difficult year, people just assume it's because of the pandemic and staying at home and working from Zoom, etc. But it's all that plus all your money gone forever, and it's not coming back. So that's why I think I wanted to mention the economic side, because that's really the most decimating part of everything that happened, where the people whose fault it is made a lot of money, and everyone else is literally left with nothing now. Nothing.
Yeah. And the thing is, COVID and the protests before were just a trigger, right?
Exactly.
Like it just started because of this, but it would have happened maybe 2-3 years later. And two things. So first, Giulio, like Lebanon probably has the same amount of inhabitants than Rome, but it has 14 banks or something like this.
More, 14 big banks maybe. We have over 35 banks in that operate in Lebanon.
It's crazy. Like when I was there, I thought like, okay, why do they have so many? It looked a lot like Italy pre, 2008, where there were all these small banks and everyone was doing real estate. And the other crazy thing was first the amount of construction, right? Like they were just building, and it was empty. And the second is, and on this point, I need to disagree a bit with you, because for me, of course, I know all the Lebanese that kind of studied abroad and stuff, and when I were there, like, I mean, they are rich, kind of, right? Not to that level that they are like the elite ruling the country, whatever, but were the people that made money when the economy was booming, and all got fucked, or most of them, during the this time. But many of them actually had these thriving businesses before, like doing real estate or whatever. And then they were telling me, no, but we actually don't invest anymore in anything. We just put money in the bank, and then we have this crazy interest. So why should we do anything? And this is the other thing that I think killed the economy totally, because I mean it crowded out completely the investment.
Oh, absolutely. It's, and if I have $100,000. Usually people invest it in something. They start a restaurant, they might create their own brand, but that would be silly in Lebanon, because if you want to do that, you need to give bribes to 1 million people to get all the paperwork you need to open it, and then you don't get electricity 24 hours a day. You need an auxiliary generator that you pay for. Then you need to pay taxes where there's no tax breaks at all for any industry, whether it's agriculture industry, etc. So honestly, you'd be an idiot to use that money and take all that risk and the cost with the instability in Lebanon, when you have the other option where they're telling you, come, give me your dollars and I'll give you interest. So this is the core problem of why we produce so little and there's so little growth in Lebanon. We just count on getting even more in debt and wasting money, if not stealing it, over things that aren't going to help, whether it's the tourism sector, which is extremely volatile given Israel and Syria are our neighbors, so it could very easily ruin a year of tourism, and that's where all the investment was. And like you said, real estate that's empty, that most Lebanese people can't afford. So it's basically like investments by expats or foreigners, and okay, I'll buy a piece of a nice apartment in Beirut and leave it empty. And the last one is there's no reason for you to do any project that does growth, and that's why we're here. I think that's why you see so little startups make it in Lebanon. And even if they do, like now recently, Anghami, if you've heard of it, it's a music streaming app. They just did their IPO, I think, on the Nasdaq. And to see that company, it started in Beirut and it grew in Beirut, but it plateaued at some point. And even some politicians tried to derail its meteoric rise in the Middle East because they thought that one of the employees there disrespected the president. Just so you see the way they think. When they moved to Dubai, they were able to, exponentially become better. And that's the story of a lot of success stories that happened in Lebanon. They can only grow so much given how much corruption there is and complete lack of infrastructure. So that's why they usually go either to Dubai, because like you said, it's the closest, and thrive there instead of them thriving here like they should.
So similar to Italy. Anyway, the
I was telling you, I think all countries on the Mediterranean have this curse.
so the question, actually, Niaru, do you want to go ahead?
No, I was always, well, thank you, Gino, for sharing all of that. I was really relating to a lot of things you were saying, of course, and every time we talk about it, it kind of boils you up inside, because like, what do we do? What do we go? Where do we go from there? This is the question that everyone is asking. But this is a direct question to Gino personally. I know that, and it's a question that different people ask sometimes, is that we know that you were affiliated before with a political party, correct? Exactly. So the Free Patriotic Movement. And what we always wanted to ask is that really, when was the time where you took a step back and you're like, this is insane, this cannot be it, I cannot agree with that anymore? Because for a lot of people, I guess it must be so hard to get out of political parties, especially if they have history and personal traumas related to the war and whatever, and so they always stay strong with those political parties. So this is my question to you.
I was definitely part of several political parties, not just the Free Patriotic Movement. Growing up, the good thing, the lucky thing in my life, in my family, in my upbringing, is they were never politically affiliated at all. Even during the war, they were able to stay at a equal distance from all the people involved. And thankfully, I don't have a story of someone close to me being killed during the war or fighting in it even. But it wasn't because of that. For me, I left the Free Patriotic Movement when I was just 16, so as a young teenager, and I know exactly the moment when I left. It was I was telling you before about March 14, 2005, where it was kicking the Assad occupation out of Lebanon, and we thought there was going to be a lot of hope in Lebanon becoming better. But what we saw less than a month after the huge protests that ejected the Syrians out, the Syrian forces, I mean, of course, not the refugees, we saw the same alliances go into the elections of 2005. So you saw Hezbollah, the Lebanese forces, Hariri, which is the prime minister now, and whose dad was the one assassinated that caused the 14 March issue, and Walid Jumblat, the Druze sectarian wartime leader, also that's still in power. So for me, I'm like, what the fuck? We did all this to get the Syrians out, and you're just doing the exact same thing that you would do when they were there. So that's when Aoun came back, and we saw him as the anti-establishment one. He came saying that Hezbollah needs to take disarm, the Syrians need to withdraw. He was even in the US Congress pleading for them to do Security Council Resolution 1559. So when Aoun came, he was the guy that ran away from the Syrians in 89 and then came back when they left. So that's when we thought, okay, these are the guys we want. They have a secular platform. They want to reform. They want to make the politicians like Birre, like Hariri, pay for all the money that they stole since the war ended, because in reality the Christian sectarian parties weren't part of the ruling elite after when the Syrian occupation was happening. So one of them, Jaja, was in jail for 11 years, and On ran away to France. So it was basically just Hariri, Jumblat, Hezbollah, and the others. On was the natural choice back then, because he was providing a progressive, secular, gender rights, a lot of things that we never saw in Lebanon by political parties that were established. The problem happened when it was clear he wanted to become president, and to do that, he did an alliance with Hezbollah in 2006, right before the Israeli war in 2006. For that, and to me, it was you literally built your entire political career on fighting the Syrian regime and oppression. But to become president, you would do the 180-degree flip just to make sure that Hezbollah by force puts you as president. So for me, that was when I left, when I started to move away from the Free Patriotic Movement and that entire block of people. But before that, I was March 14. I was with the Syrian regime withdrawing from Lebanon. And the feeling of betrayal by the rest of the political parties that were supposedly against the Syrian occupation, coalescing with Hezbollah and Birri and Jumblat, made us go to On. And when On did that flip-flop, we were like, okay, none of these people mean what they say. They're just people who will do anything to grab onto more power, regardless if it is the absolute opposite of what they were claiming for such a long time. So for me, that was it. I think 2008-9, I became politically, my opinions formed back around that time. Maybe by 2010, we were starting to do our first protests. I wasn't doing them, of course. I was participating for the Laïc Pride, so asking for secular laws in Lebanon. I think that for me was the beginning of what's happening now with the Thawra, with the uprising. And then in 2015, the garbage crisis in Lebanon, when they couldn't decide who would take the money for picking up garbage. I think you had a problem like that also at some point in Italy.
Exactly, where Gianluca comes from is exactly. But now, I used to, we used to mock people from Naples because of the same problem, and then obviously it happened in Rome as well, exactly like a few years later. So there was absolutely nothing to mock about.
That happened in 2015, and that was the second time that people came out in the street without the sectarian political parties. That for me was the start. And 2019 for me is the natural progression of 2015. So that's why a lot of times that people feel completely hopeless and sad and that we're not doing anything, I don't see it that way, because I look at it, if we compare what we're doing now to what we were doing in 2015, it's exponentially better. And the change we've had when it comes to culturally in Lebanon, no one likes these politicians. The people still with them as only for personal benefit, or because they're too scared to leave, or they're actually tied to them in one way or another. But everyone else knows that they're absolute shit, and no one respects them anymore. And that for me is the thing I'm most proud of, where before you couldn't talk about the president or Nasrallah or any of the big six mafia leaders in Lebanon. Now people talk horrible things about them 24/7. And some people might be like, oh, why are they using this language? It's so impolite, blah, blah, blah. But for me, it's extremely important to break that sanctity that these people had. You're just some asshole stealing money. You have no special eminence or special respect anymore. And I love that, because that's something, no matter how many people they arrest or kill or shoot, that respect they're never gonna get back. You're always gonna hear chants that started in October 17. You never saw someone talk about Nasrallah openly. Now you see them after the blast. Someone hung an effigy of Nasrallah in the middle of Beirut. So that shift, you might not see it translated yet in institutions and parliament and ministerial positions, but there's no going back to pre-October 2019, and people's mindset changed. And what I also tell myself to keep going, if they manage to stop us now, it's gonna come back in a few years, if not a few months. This is exactly what happened in 2015. They did absolutely everything to quash the protests back then. They came tenfold more powerful in 2019, which was, by the way, only 1 year after parliamentary elections, which shows you how quickly they fell out of favor, because they won the elections less than a year before people did this huge uprising, which goes to show you that the electoral law and how the elections are run and all the vote rigging that happens shows you that it doesn't reflect the results of the election, doesn't reflect the reality, where most people absolutely hate this system and know that it needs to change. And we're at a weird point now where I'm sure the politicians know that we know that they're lying, but they say it anyway, because I think a lot of them are just talking to their own base at this point. So when Aounis go out and say something extremely stupid, I'm like, how does this make any sense to you? But it makes sense to their own base. So if they say, why doesn't the protesters go to the central bank? So them, it's a nice talking point for their base. But in reality, the president, which is their leader, is the one that extended for the central bank governor in 2017. So I'm like, how can you lie about this when it's clear that you kept him in power because he's funneled some money into the banks that your daughters own? But he knows we're lying. But for his base, they'll be like, yeah, he's right. Why don't these Tuwar go? Tuwar is the people rising up. Go to the central bank's house. Or they keep choosing a different villain every now and then when they're part of that issue. And I think we're in this weird place where this hyper normalization of stuff that shouldn't happen, it's like a theater now. They all know they're lying, and that we know they're lying, but they're pummeling ahead with it. Even till now, they still say, yeah, we need to do reforms. After everything literally is gone, they still think that they can do reforms for all the damage they've already done and are still doing.
Well, in a way, because they ran out of what to say as well, and they've been saying so many lies over the years, even on air, that when now they talk, people immediately find back what they have said 2 years ago. Like, when someone says too many lies, it gets to a point where you cannot find them anymore. You will forget what you said before.
Find their tweet immediately.
Yeah, exactly.
One of my favorite things to do, actually.
to find what they said before.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Advanced search on Twitter is the best tool, I think, to shut them up.
Definitely. And also the thing is, like, with this revolution, I think also the difference between this one and 2015, not that 2015 wasn't a big one, but when you were mentioning, Gino, the fact that people were mentioning, like Nasrallah's name and insulting him on the streets and whatever, just to tell you that to reach this point on the streets, it means really that people had nothing to lose anymore. And this is really the rock bottom that we have reached. And in a way, this is the sad part, I think, for me, Gino, is that there's so much despair and and so much sadness, but also sometimes numbness, that people are not fearing anything on the streets. And even if they lose their lives, like, for them, what they're experiencing is even worse. So I think this is the impact of a revolution this big, no? So,
well, I think what's worse, everyone saw this coming, and still no one could do anything about it. I think that for me is the worst part. Like, we knew this was gonna happen. It was clear this is the trajectory. Was it enough people? Maybe not, but they've had enough time to understand that. But like we said, it's difficult to admit that you've been doing the wrong thing for a few decades. You're probably gonna choose to, sink with the ship. Usually the leaders of the political parties in Lebanon run away when the ship is sinking.
yeah.
Like Aoun did. He left his family and his men to be killed by Assad, and he ran away to France, lived there for I don't know how many years. So I wish they would actually sink with their ships. Unfortunately, no. They just let the lowest common denominator, suffer, and they live in armed palaces that no one can even reach. If they want, if their wives want to go shopping, they give them a military escort to carry their bags, and that's all our money at the end of the day being spent on this stupid stuff, if not actual theft of everything. That's the worst part for me. How avoidable it was, but unfortunately, money kept coming in. It kept coming in from everywhere. A lot of the blame also can go on European leaders who have supported this government over the decades. Who Paris 1, Paris 2, then the meetings that happened in Italy. That was all money. Cedars. That was all money coming to this establishment. So they are equally culpable in that. So it's not just Iran, it's not just Saudi, it's also Europe and the States, because States, I guess, a bit less because they're a big no-no on Hezbollah. But when it comes to Europe, for example, we were able to document over 4,000 violations last elections in 2018. And there was supposed to be a committee that monitors this election from the EU. They went the same day to the Minister of Interior, told him, bravo, it was great. I'm like, how did you have time to revise all this stuff? So they were rubber stamping it. And I think a lot of times they used to think, khalas, we just need to keep Lebanon stable so that the Syrian refugees here, don't come to Europe again, like what was happening before, the motive for them. And that unfortunately prolonged our suffering in Lebanon a lot. So just keeping the status quo when it's gonna blow up in such a spectacular way is bad. The tear gas and the weaponry used on us every single day for 2 years is all donated by countries like France, and the UK. So right now, I think the good, there isn't any good thing, honestly, with the situation now. But if there's one good thing, is that the money stopped coming from the West to support this horrible sectarian war criminals in charge. And you could see that after the blast, a lot of countries did not give money to the Lebanese government. They gave it directly to INGOs like the Lebanese Red Cross or other NGOs, local NGOs that they work with regularly. And that shows you how little trust is left with the current ruling elite. If there's something to all my Italian people listening to this podcast, is try to make sure that whatever aid your government, your taxes actually goes to Lebanon, make sure it doesn't go through the central bank and it doesn't go to this corrupt political establishment, because if it does, you're basically hitting the last nail in Lebanese people's coffin. The only way that this sulta, we call it, the establishment, can stay is if they get money from abroad, which has always been the case. And it doesn't look like they're gonna get any, thankfully, for now. But Lebanese people do need them, and I suggest that it's always better to give to INGOs like the International Red Cross, even UN agencies sometimes, over the Lebanese government. Because just to give you an example, the Lebanese government decided to tax all the aid that came after the blast. Imagine putting a tax on aid for people whose houses were destroyed and their children killed and their entire lives destroyed. They decided that they want 10% cut of that money. So imagine what kind of people we are. So what a lot of people ask me, especially expats or friends of who like Lebanon and follow it, is that make sure your government stops supporting these really criminal, genocidal war criminals still in power in Lebanon. And as long as that doesn't happen, I think that change is coming for the better.
Speaking of change, I was actually curious to hear your opinion about this. So the way you're describing it reminds me a lot. Obviously the situation in Italy has never been this tragic. So, we need the intellectual honesty to actually recognize that. We are very lucky from this point of view. Although I do have a philosophical, I would say, comment for the end of the live. There are a question/comment that I will make at the end of the live. But anyway, speaking of change, I would like to know whether you think there is, from a political perspective, there is something cooking up that might actually bring change to Lebanon, either in the form of movements or new parties, or even, which I actually think is the best way forward, even if it takes a really long time, like simply a cultural movement to influence the thought of people. I mean, the way you describe it, it sounds like there is already something going on, but you know, whether there is an actual alternative right now, I would be curious to know that.
Yes, I'll be honest, it's not going as quickly as I hope it would, but it's happening in the background. So you see a lot of groups that formed from 2015 till now, especially after 2019, the uprising. You see a lot of groups. You have older groups like Beirut Madinati, who ran in the Beirut municipal elections in 2016. You have Lihaqi, you have the National Bloc, which is a very old party and political party in Lebanon that has been revived basically by young progressive liberal young men and women in Lebanon. You have Mentashirin, which is the group I'm part of, which came out from the October 17 revolution. And you see them, I think the only silver lining with the pandemic and the lockdown was that we were able to focus on internally creating the platform, the system of these political movements and parties to hopefully be members of parliament and municipal elections, like taking charge of municipalities. And I'll say just one thing. In Lebanon, they always say that, oh, people will vote for the same people. That's what you always hear as an excuse to not actually do political work. No one, not a single post-war election had more than 50% of voters actually vote. So no one actually knows if they have a majority or not. And two, there's never been a credible alternative. So it's always been these guys. They always draw the districts to ensure that they will win. And it's funny here because everyone predicts what the election results will be according to which law they use. And they're drawing the law based on who's running, not vice versa, not decide who's running based on the law. So, and since 2019, every election that happened in a university campus, in a syndicate, in a labor union, the Thawra has won every single one, even in places where you wouldn't expect. So when people are given an alternative that's credible, that's honest, that isn't just, you know, trying to put a band-aid on an issue, people who are taking it. And that's one thing I'm happy about, and see that it could lead to change. But it's also new. So a lot of these parties maybe have been operating for a year or two versus ones that have been embedded in everything for over 4 decades. So it's definitely not going to come up to par with the established ones. But I see in the future that happen. And what I like about them is, for example, Lebanon has only 2 or 3 maybe female MPs, which is less than 2% of the total. You see a lot of these new political parties and groups being gender neutral, where they have as many women as men, and being extremely progressive on LGBT issues, on personal civil status laws that are unified. Because in Lebanon, everything that governs your marriage, your custody of children, your inheritance, is not unified. It's depending on your sect, and you go to a religious court for that. So a Lebanese man that's a Maronite doesn't have the same law as a Lebanese man who's a Shia or a Sunni. They have completely different laws, and that's amazing. Then you see Maronites, for example, it's almost impossible for them to get a divorce. So that always causes a problem in that community. You know, when there's abuse, when there's a problem with custody. Another problem is for the Shia, the age of custody for the father is very young. So maybe at 2 or 3 years old, they consider the kid is supposed to go with his dad, which is a problem if the kid, if dad is the issue, is the abuser, is the harasser. So you see these tragedies every day happen here, and it contributes a lot to why, why there's no sense of belonging to Lebanon, because there's 18 different laws for each one depending on where you were born. And that, I think, is the most important thing that we need to change for for Lebanon to start getting better, because everything is extremely horrible. It's hard to decide where to start. But for me, having a secular civil status law is the first step, because it'll stop making the community so isolated from each other. Now, if you want to marry someone from another sect, they need to convert, or vice versa, which is a lot of people would rather not do. And that's why you see a lot of young Lebanese men and women, they go to Cyprus or Greece to get civil married there, to avoid going to the religious courts in Lebanon that are always unfair to women and usually don't take the child's best interest into account. They just take what the religious scripture says. So you see, even like travel agencies have a package for people who want to go get married in Cyprus, where they pay one flat fee and they get the tickets and the fees to actually register the marriage in Cyprus and come back to Lebanon the same day. And it's that big of an issue. That, of course, all of them fight it a lot. Like Hezbollah says, this is a US conspiracy to ruin our society, blah, 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 all that stuff, when we say we want to stop child marriage in Lebanon. Because that's still legal in some sects, where an underage girl can get married to an adult male still. So wait, let me move from the... Sorry. So yes, change is happening. And I think what's nice about all the political movements that are springing up is they all agree it has to be a secular state, and that the laws need to be made into secular ones, not sectarian ones. So the problem is that the situation is deteriorating too quickly for us to, take our time with this. And at least from my end, the pressure is always on these groups to form a coalition that makes sense and start introducing their candidates. So at least next elections, that one, we can force them to happen, because they always either cancel or postpone elections in Lebanon if they're not sure they're gonna win. So one, be able to pressure them into actually having elections, and two, actually winning the biggest parliamentary bloc when it does happen. So yes, despite all the horror and despair now, and you shouldn't talk about resilience or hope, all that, because it's honestly insulting now to say that. But plus, this system is gone, the current one. It's dead. There's no way it'll ever come back to life anymore. And they know it, we know it. The problem is we need to make sure the alternative is better and not worse. But yeah, this era is
It's
done.
difficult to make it worse. So this
Yeah,
is
you would think that,
You
think
think
that,
that-
and we think that, and it just still gets worse. Really, like you'd be shocked.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that.
No, it's good you mentioned what you were talking, but was actually linked to the question I had for you, Gino. Because you were mentioning, especially in this revolution, how some old movements that were handled now by youth, like we're talking about national bloc, by Menteshrin, Beirut Madinati. So I see all of those movements happening. I see a bit of plan of what do they want to change and all of that. But now the elections of 2022 will come. And for me, what's a bit confusing, because the revolution seemed big and strong, but it did seem a bit scattered. So there's a lot happening. And when the elections will come, you don't think that we should have now a representative of those movements, like more specific ones, ahead of time, for people to start getting to know them, what they did, whatever. So then when we reach a point, because now we're talking about movements, but the elections will come and I need to vote. And if the representatives start being revealed a bit short before the elections, it might be too late to gain.
I hope, this is what I've been wanting to do since before the lockdown, obviously. But it's not that easy also. Then again,
I'm sure
these groups are new. They don't know each other. The level of trust isn't there. And the problem is a lot of people wasted a lot of time on focusing on unity, as if that was the point, having one unified thought. No, it's not. A lot of people with us in the street don't agree on the kind of Lebanon we want. And we need to address that. We know that this is not the case. Some parties think that Hezbollah is fine and should remain. Others don't. for example.
Yeah.
And for me to say unity with these kinds of people when we don't want the same thing, I think is wrong, and we wasted a lot of time on that. But the point now is, the hope is, forming loose coalitions between the many different opinions on the spectrum when it comes to being anti-establishment. And that's what's happening now. I see a lot of political movements coming together, doing the same protests together, doing the same press releases together, which is good, definitely, but not ideal. It should be much better. The other problem is, and it's scary in Lebanon to be a political candidate against the government. We see in Lebanon assassinations happen all the time. They're still happening now. Luqman Slim was killed less than two months ago in Hezbollah-controlled areas, and he's a very prominent critic. We see a lot of people linked to the investigation of the port dying in mysterious circumstances or straight out assassinated. So we also need to take that into consideration. A lot of people think once and twice and three times before doing that, because if they're not assassinated, there's going to be an attempt to assassinate their character. They'll say, oh, they're foreign embassy agents, or oh, they get paid, blah, blah, blah. The electronic militia system that the political parties created was pretty effective in killing the 2015 Stink movement. It was all the disinformation and fake news that shook people's trust in the people that were prominent back then, and you don't see them now a lot. So a lot of the faces that were famous in 2015 couldn't come back because of what was done to them, basically by the. So there's that part of people being a bit scared of being in the front line, when it's so much safer to be like you said, scattered. I like to say decentralized more, because they wouldn't be able to attack us. So if we elect a head of the Thawra altogether in some weird form or shape, he's gonna get killed, or she's gonna get killed immediately, or put in jail. And you see that in a lot of people that become a bit visible. They get summoned over silly things to court. They get detained illegally. They try to trump up drug charges for them. And it's a police state that learned its tactics from the Assad regime and over the years. So imagine it's a knockoff version of what Assad does to Syrian people. It's definitely a smaller scale because they're incompetent and stupider than Assad, I think. But the tactics are very similar. The disinformation, the intimidation, and bodily harm and death sometimes even. There's a lot of, but yeah, I'm showing a lot of frustration when it comes to that, their inability to do a coalition that makes sense. But I also understand why. What's nice is there was always an ego problem in Lebanon for the alternative options, always, that I'm the one that knows best and you all need to follow what I want. There was never a more democratic way of deciding which policy to implement or which route to take. I'm seeing that a lot more in groups like the Haqqi, like Beirut Madinati, like National Bloc, even Tishrin, where it's an internal election process, where there's direct democracy now, where people fall behind whatever decision is taken because it's the one that is the most popular democratically, not because I think I'm better than you, so I should run, which is what happened in 2018 in several districts. You saw a lot of anti-establishment people run two different lists against one unified list of the establishment. Of course, you're not going to win. Why did you do that? Why didn't you solve the issue internally? So that's what's happening now. So I'm hopeful, but it's taking a lot of time. It shouldn't take this much time, I think.
So, as I said, I have a sort of a philosophical question regarding the situation in Lebanon, because, you know, everything that you told us, Gino, is, I mean, there are so many parallels with Italy. Starting from the fact that, for example, there is this detrimental mix between public and private, especially in money administration. And there is another, in my opinion, I hope I don't say something too controversial here, but there is a detrimental mix between state and church, for example, state of confession, which, with the utmost respect for whoever has a faith, absolutely, that is absolutely not the point. It's just that the two things should be kept, in my humble opinions, as separate as possible. I mean, this is
Absolutely.
this is a personal opinion, but I mean, it sounds like
I'm not sure if it's that bad with you guys. Then for us, it's like the actual law.
And for us, it's one church, right? So it's a bit easier, let's say, like that. Once they called.
For us,
it used to be.
If I'm married and I want to divorce, I don't go to a court, a civilian court. I go to a court where it's a priest that's deciding based on church law if I can divorce or not. And the same goes for each sect. So for us, it's not like faith is having a big role to play. They actually are the law. So the law is set down by priests and sheikhs and religious figures in Lebanon, and that's, I think, the core of the problem. I'm pretty sure it's not like that in Italy. I hope
no,
not.
but it used to be like this. It used to be like this. That's the thing.
We're still like this.
Well, this is the thing, because so it's funny enough. I had so many Middle Eastern friends, and don't know. I mean, you guys are probably the first two people I know from Lebanon. I know people from Egypt. I know people from Palestine. I know people from Israel, Syria, Iraq. Well, like kind of close friends and colleagues as well. Like and I've been to Palestine myself. Obviously, Emirates and stuff. So, and I often find myself speaking with these two colleagues of mine, debating about the fact that the Middle East, the essential problem of the Middle East needs to be to become a secularized place. Like, they need. It sounds like sounds from
everywhere.
I mean,
from
everywhere. Outside. Yeah, no, I agree, but
I think.
What I mean is actually, I was wondering whether it is, I mean, I'm generalizing too much, or is the same problem for Lebanon, because essentially for most of the people I've spoken with there, they say, the main problem is that we are too much driven by state religion. And that obviously, is a big...
I think this is more per country. For example, Egypt is a lot more homogeneous than Lebanon. You have a clear majority that can easily function, and when you go to the Gulf, it's not democracy. They're all monarchies, so it's very different in how they run the system. The beauty of Lebanon, the Lebanese experiment, if you want, is how diverse it is. So none of the sects have a majority, so no one can impose whatever they want on the rest, which is not the case in many of the countries around us. There's always a very clear majority that do it, whether it's in Iraq, whether it's in Syria, whether it's in Palestine, occupied Palestine, everywhere. And Egypt, you see some tensions usually between the Copts and the majority Sunni population, but it's not like here in Lebanon. In Lebanon, the problem it's supposed to be a democracy, and what's happening is the centralized government has way too much control compared to the local ones. And what's been happening in our recent history, it was originally the Maronites that were in charge of everything for a very long time. And then the civil war happened. Right after it, with Hariri and these guys, the Sunnis became more in control of most of the things in the country, in rebuilding and the post-war Lebanon with the support of Saudi, of the Gulf, etc. Now it's Hezbollah, which is the Shia sectarian militia, that's calling the shots, basically. So the problem is that everyone is always fighting over a central government that is incapable of actually doing anything. So all the energy and money and even the way you consider if you won or not is not by what you accomplish. For example, Aunists, the Free Patriotic Movement, they don't ever say, oh, we managed to do this plan or implement this project. They say, we managed to replace a Druze or a Shia or a Sunni public employee with a Christian one. That's how they see it in their mind. So it's become a means to an end, unfortunately, sectarian divides, when no one actually does anything. So I don't care if the person responsible for this ministry is a Druze woman or a Sunni man. I don't care if the services are gonna still be equally bad. But this is how they think, unfortunately, now. And another solution would be, other than making everything secular when it comes to laws, it would be decentralizing. So if I don't need to go to Beirut and be the head of the ministry to be able to get decent roads in my home district, that's fine. I can change the policy in my own home district and use the taxes that I'm paying there to develop places that have been extremely neglected by the central government, like Akkar, like Ba'a, like different parts of the south, that basically aren't on the radar. Everyone just wants to control the power centered in Beirut without actually doing anything with it. So it's more about taking away from others than actually doing something that helps, unfortunately.
Thank you.
I had a bit of, I mean, I don't want to say a trip, right? But in the last part of what you were saying, I don't know, I had this flashback of when I was in Lebanon. And then I thought, wow, I really wonder how it is right now. Anyway, like I think the bottom line, and also the reason of why I thought it was important to have this story today, is that it's always and this, of course, I'm talking about the foreigner perspective. Okay. It's always when you see suffering, right, in general in life, like we know that the world goes in a lot of suffering. Many people suffer and the world is fucked up. But of course, our natural preservation, doesn't let us think like, oh, like, I don't know, I'm enjoying this pizza right now, but there's someone in Africa who is dying out of hunger, right? What happens and it's when you really start thinking like, wow, this is fucked up, and I'm sorry. It's when experiences are relatable, right? So for me, the problem is not only I've been there, I spent a lot of time there, I have friends from there, but I know how people used to live and think and the hopes they have. And it's also a place where people are very attached to the country, right? I mean, it's a bit like exactly. Italy. It's not the place where you go abroad and, you meet the Lebanese and they tell you, I don't really give a fuck. No, like most of them, I mean, it's people that suffer about the fact that they don't have any foreseeable hope of thinking, oh, this might change, there is this thing, and when you subtract hope to people, that's the worst thing. And right now, I mean, the other problem is let's say that the material condition. I was talking to a friend yesterday that her mom went to the supermarket in Beirut, and there wasn't rice. There wasn't rice on the shelves, right? And you were saying at the beginning, now with the new Lebanese lira exchange rate, like I think the average salary is something like $30 a month, 34. And the Beirut, I remember, which of course was already a fucked up place in its own because of income inequality and all the things that we described at the beginning. But it's Iris. I don't know. It's like that thing. And now in my mind, I think like imagine people going like the same people, yeah. And that's incredibly impactful and sad. But I mean,
the people that would go to these places were the more better off ones, but even those people now are considered under the poverty line. That's what's interesting. And the people that were already doing extremely bad, imagine how bad their situation is. So it's twofold. It's for the people who were used to a certain standard of living, knowing it's not sustainable, and then suddenly not being able to do that at all. And for people who never had that don't want to say luxury, but a more prosperous life, imagine what their life is like now. So it's literally everyone is feeling the horror of this in different ways, of course, except those in charge. They are the ones that are immune to any of the damage they've done. And that's where a lot of the motivation of people to change comes from. Even if you don't believe in the same thing, that's what's happening is wrong. That you're being robbed by people who are evil, blah, 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 all that, but also extremely stupid and incompetent. The level of incompetence is what drives me crazy. How are these people the ones calling the shots? They forget to pay, for example, the subscription to the international cable that gives internet to Lebanon and connects us to Europe and Cyprus. They just forgot to pay once. The Haida. Come on, how isn't this automated? Or how doesn't someone have a job to actually do that and make sure? So that's what's keeps it going. There's no way these stupid idiots can keep doing this. And there's so many people that are a million times better than them. in that spot that could do something good instead of just complain.
And so to end with a more positive note, besides our reflections, so one question that we ask to every guest is basically, what is your favorite book? Now I will add a bonus question. That is, what is your favorite book about Lebanon? And why do I ask this? Because many people always ask me, can I read something on the history of Lebanon, maybe on the history of Middle East, blah, blah, blah. And then, I mean, I have a few, but they are all like, these big books, also not necessarily focused on Lebanon, because I don't think it's very easy to understand the situation if you don't understand the region.
That's difficult,
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah. But anyway, go with whatever your favorite. Yeah.
I think a book that I recently read that explained a lot the situation both in Lebanon and the region is called Black Wave. It's by Kim Ghattas. She's a Lebanese journalist. It's very interesting because she highlights two major stuff that happened in 1979. The first was the Iranian Islamic Revolution, and the second was when extremists took over Mecca in Saudi. And that was a turning point for both Iran and Saudi. They became a lot more theocratic and backwards, and that's where the Wahhabism started to go on the rise in Saudi, and the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps began wreaking havoc on everyone else. So it puts a lot of the problems that many countries face now, it makes them clearer. Whether it's in the Gulf, whether it's Iraq, whether it's Lebanon, whether it's Palestine, all the people suffering now from the dichotomy of Saudi and Iran. One book that helped me a lot, you're gonna laugh at this, but throughout the revolution, was The Lord of the Rings. The Tolkien book. It helped a lot because a lot of times we would ask ourselves, why does this happen on our turn, on our time? Why did we have to absorb the entire shock of all the generations that came before us? It's always a question you ask, why couldn't I just have a nice life, blah, blah, blah. So I always use Gandalf quotes to stay motivated and help motivate others, where he tells Frodo, it's not up to us to decide if this happens now or not. It's up to us to decide what we do with the time given to us to do that. And that's a very at least it helped me. I know it's gonna seem stupid and silly after all the serious talk we had, but yeah, it's always been on the especially dark moments in the past few years. That's always been the thing that grounds you again. And okay, it's fucked up that it had to happen now on our turn, that we couldn't enjoy the sports other generations maybe did. But it's not up to you to decide, so you need to try to make it better. And one source for history of Lebanon specifically is Heritage and Roots on Instagram. It's he's a historian, Shal Hayek, and I've become a huge fan of him because he has a lot of interesting and accurate takes on the modern history of Lebanon. Because I don't know if you know, but our history books in school stop at the First World War or the second, or by the 1920s, after the First World War. We learn nothing since then at all, because no one can agree what the history is of the Civil War, of the blah, blah, blah. And each one adopts the narrative that fits their own sectarian or historical thing. What I like about Charles and Heritage and Roots is that it's showing us what really happened, like why Lebanon exists the way it does. And one thing I like about him is how Lebanese food, how important it is that it's part of our heritage and culture, because a lot of time we make fun of, they made the biggest hummus plate, blah, blah, blah. But if you think about it, this is something great. This is something that our heritage to the rest of the world that everyone loves. So it's like someone saying,
you're talking to Italian, so
I love
pizza,
I love it.
etc. You should.
I love it. One of my favorite places in London is a Lebanese restaurant in Edgware Road. They have fantastic hummus with aubergine. I love it.
So like
Yeah.
you guys, you know, pizza, other Italian cuisine, something part of your heritage that the entire world knows and loves, and this is like one way of demonstrating your history. And I like that Charles did that, because a lot of times we're like, it's not that important. Yes, it is. You know, that the fact that a lot of dishes that were made in the mountains of Lebanon by illiterate farmers, I don't know how many centuries ago, is actually something that we were able to export and educate more about the culture and the history of it. So I'd recommend that. And Black Wave for the political stuff. I think it's a very relevant book now. And what's nice about it is that it's people who experienced this firsthand that she interviewed. So you learn stuff how Khomeini came back when the revolution in Iran started to basically hijack it or steer it in a different direction, because you know there it was Marxists and seculars that started the revolution against the Shah, and we forget them now, because when the Islamists came to power there, the Ayatollahs, they killed them all or forced them to flee or put them in jail. But that's a very good book to understand why the situation is so fucked up in the Middle East right now, and hopefully figure out how it might become better.
Well, I have a final question at this point. Talking about cultural heritage, I always wanted to visit Lebanon to see the forest of cedar. My understanding is that it's actually much smaller than it used to be, but they're trying to repopulate, so to try to actually make it work again. But the cedars grow so slowly. Is that true? So that they tried actually there's a project of reforestation there or not?
This is like a prestige thing that a lot of the politicians do, because it's you know, the cedar is on our flag, it's the symbol of the country. Enough. But the problem is that it doesn't correlate with the science. So because of climate change, a cedar cone needs to be frozen for a specific amount of time to bloom in spring. That's not happening as much anymore. So a lot of the trees that they plant end up dying, you know, or not even surviving or blooming properly. So yeah, the deforestation is a huge issue, definitely. But there still is nice cedar forest. The most famous one is the one in above Shadri, the Cedars of God, they're called, where a lot of poetry and stuff was written about it, and they're really amazing, honestly. The trees, of how old they are. But you have a lot more in Shuf, in Maasar al-Shuf. You have a very big forest, a very big natural reserve there. You have in different parts of Akkar and the north, next to my hometown, Ehden, you have a very big natural reserve that has cedar trees and other species only found in that specific like flowers and butterflies that you can't find anywhere else. So I think now it's maybe 13% of what it used to be, the forests in Lebanon. And every year with the forest fires, a big amount is unfortunately disappearing. And it's our fault, definitely. It's humans' fault and bad governance and no planning. But the problem is, I think climate is changing too much, where we're not going to be able to save our cedar trees, which have, if you think about it, have seen everything. They've been since the Gilgamesh first ever told story. They mentioned those cedars and building stuff like the pyramids, the Temple of Solomon, Phoenicians, boats. All that was from those trees. So to think that they might stop existing in our lifetime is pretty unfortunate, of course. But it goes into the whole climate change issue and how we need to figure out to do that, because not enough research is being done on that, and the ones available is showing that much shorter and less cold winters are an obstacle for Lebanese cedar trees to grow and flourish again.
Thank you.
So thank you very much.
That's actually my actual. I did biology. So this is the one question I'm actually qualified to do.
Yeah, no, I was always curious to visit Lebanon. Well, to see the country, honestly, and I always had this curiosity to see the forest of cedar. And also that's the reason why we call this live like that, because obviously it's a national symbol for you guys, but also there's a song by U2 called Cedars of Lebanon, and I'm a big fan, so I thought it was an interesting mix to propose.
I love the cedars. We in my family's hometown, and then we have a cedar tree in our yard. It's I think it's beautiful. I think though that imagine that they've seen all the horrible stages that Lebanon has passed through throughout the thousands of years, and they're still standing there. It's a very big issue if they die on our watch. Like it's survived the Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire, Ramses II, the 2 world wars, and the famine, and the genocide, and they witnessed all that, and now they're struggling to survive what few we still have. But so that's even more reason to get our shit together and figure out how to stop the environmental tragedy that's been not even tragedy, crimes that this establishment has done, whether by creating failed dams like which is the prestige projects of the Free Patriotic Movement. They built I'm not sure, maybe 6 or 7 dams. All of them failed. They didn't even work, so they just destroyed pristine valleys and green areas to get commission for dams that don't even work in a country where we don't really need them. We have enough water supply without decimating places like Jannah forest or Nahar Ibrahim, which they're trying to destroy now. We did stop one though. They were trying to destroy Najd Bisri, the Aunis, with the World Bank, and public pressure from activists in Lebanon stopped the funding, thankfully, and diverted the rest of it into COVID relief. So there is some good. And now you're seeing a lot of the cleanups of the Lebanese shore, because an oil tanker off the coast of Palestine released a lot of oil, and it's washing up on all our shore now. So it's always, playing catch up, unfortunately. And I think the worst legacy that this political establishment will have is what they've done to the nature in Lebanon, whether it's the seas. In Lebanon, there's no sewage treatment at all. All the sewers go right into the sea, untreated, completely. For example, a lot of towns still burn their garbage, rural areas. And after 2015, so much solid waste was stored in either natural reserves or wilderness, and no one is going to fix that, unfortunately, with this establishment. And I don't know if we can ever undo the damage that has been done. And you see the quarries where they get the rock and the cement. They've also decimated a lot of our mountains. We even have a task force in Tishrin only for environmental issues. We think it's that big of a problem that needs just as much attention as everything else. Of course, it's important to focus on all that, but if the environment where you live in can't support life anymore, nothing else matters at the end of the day. No, who cares about the electoral law if you can't drink water or breathe the air?
Totally.
Gino, thank you so much.
Thank you. It was great. I actually had fun with you guys, even though the topic is everything but fun. But thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It was very, very interesting. It was an honor to have you guys here.
And we learned something today, and I guess also our public. So thank you, and inshallah, it will be better. So
hopefully, next time we talk, it'll be nicer news.
Okay.
Hopefully. Thank you, Gino, for your time.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye.